news today that outdoor live performances can start again in England from Monday.
This is very exciting.
Yeah.
What kinds?
Well, I don't think there's a limit on the genre. I think it could be anything. And it could, in theory, be, I don't know, an outdoor comedy gig.
Oh. Do you know anyone who does them?
Perhaps, I don't know, Russell Kane? Hi, Russell.
Hello, how you doing?
Can you picture yourself doing an outdoor comedy gig?
I've done loads of them, absolutely loads over the years, at festivals, underneath. It depends how you're defining outdoor. Would it be like a loose marquee but the sides are open? But I've done completely outdoor as well, but you're at the mercy of the weather then.
What do you think will be the first gag that you tell when you can go and do a gig, whether it's outdoor or indoors again?
Well, I probably will unleash a 100-mile-an-hour torrent of verbal AK spray about Boris Johnson's handling of COVID-19. But for the purposes of this soundbite, I will probably go, why did the comedian walk into the bar? He didn't. There was someone playing a trumpet inside and the place was evacuated.
That's actually not a joke. That's a true piece of guidance, I think, from the government website, actually.
Right. Each of my jokes, I like to go with a trombone, which I legally now cannot do. And if you're asking, can we joke about COVID-19? That is the very point where we need to get comedy back up on its feet, because I'm lucky to have very old relatives. I've got relatives that aren't very well. I've been seeing people in all types of situations and they've made it through. And let me tell you, one of the last things to give out isn't cutting political insight or intelligent conversation. It's sense of humour, laughter. And once that goes, everything goes.
Well, plenty more from Russell and from the government guidance on the website in this edition of the Coronavirus Newscast.
The Coronavirus Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
And Laura in the same studio, 2 metres apart.
And Fergus in another studio, a new broadcasting house.
And I'm really wishing I'd written down the dates of all the things that are opening up in England over the next few weeks. I thought I could remember them, but there's so many I now can't. So we will stumble our way through that with your help. But first of all, let's bring in Simon Jack, our business editor. Hello, Simon.
Hello, Adam. Hello, Laura.
Hi.
And hello, Fergus.
And hello, Fergus. Sorry, he's sitting right next to me.
We're 2 metres apart. Yeah.
He's sitting next to me. I didn't feel the need to do that.
To me, you two are just out there in the ether. I don't know. Right. So, I mean, great news if you run a nail bar or you run a gym or maybe an outdoor theatre, because they are opening up. But terrible news today if you, work at Boots or John Lewis, for example.
Yeah, I mean, less than 24 hours after Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, announced his great pitch to try and save as many jobs as he could, it appears that he cannot stem the tide of these job losses. Boots, 4,000 job losses. That's 48 of their Boots opticians. That's hundreds of managers in their high street stores, but mainly at their headquarters in Nottingham, where it is a massively important local employer. Also, John Lewis, 1,300, the great survivor, if you remember, from the 2008-2009 crisis, showing they're not immune. 1,300 jobs to go there. And what's interesting about that is they said that last year 40% of their sales were online. This year and next, they think that will be 70%. So that's an astonishing statistic.
That's one of the things I wanted to ask you, Simon. I mean, particularly John Lewis, which is, I think, the first place that the Chancellor went to go and do a photo opportunity when shops were just opening, and he was pictured in John Lewis, helping them put in the screens, helping them put up the new signs. But in your mind, business, Simon, from talking to businesses all the time, how much are these job losses about trends that were coming anyway, and how much is it about the fall off the cliff from COVID?
I think there are two things going on. So, as you say, there were trends that were already happening, which have been accelerated. Let's face it, all of us, I'm reckoning, have bought more online than we did before. And we were all buying more online than we did a couple of years ago. So that trend has been accelerated. So that kind of retail space we just don't need, or people don't, there isn't the demand for it. There is a different dimension, which is, for example, the hospitality and retail sector. We are ordering more sort of takeaways. But they are the ones who are hit by the short term. This is hit them sort of almost overnight. And they are finding it very difficult to bounce back, because even if you give this, 2-for-1 early bird special, which the Chancellor announced yesterday.
Rishi's meal deal.
Rishi's meal deal, £10 per diner, whatever. Demand might not be the problem. The problem might be supply. People aren't not going into a pizza place or a restaurant because there isn't a VAT cut. They're going in there because either they don't feel comfortable, or the capacity, for those that do feel comfortable, the capacity of the actual venue is constrained by the new rules. So 75% of all hospitality venues are expected to not break even this year. So expecting them to bring all their staff back, no matter what the incentives are, seems to be, I think, a little fanciful. I think you're going to start to see that. And the people I'm speaking to saying, I cannot afford, with very little or constrained income, to hang on to staff for 6 months from now in order to collect £1,000 bonus per employee I keep on for the next 6 months. Others will say, listen, I was going to bring back all my employees anyway. So some will see this as a massive windfall. A well-known hamburger joint, for example, employs 120,000 people in this country. They furloughed at least 90% of their staff at one point. That puts them in line, potentially, makes them eligible for a £100 million plus payout from the Chancellor, whereas others will not be able to survive at all.
I would say that would be a Whopper payout, but it's a different burger chain from that one. Simon,
either will do.
Simon, the BBC's getting their money's worth from you today, so we'll let you go off and do the many millions of other things you've got to do. But thank you very much for bringing us up to date with all of that. Now, Simon was mentioning one of the initiatives that Rishi Sunak announced yesterday, and he got a lot of praise for at the time, which was that bonus scheme. So the idea that people who bring back furloughed employees and keep them on their books until at least January next year will get a £1,000 bonus for doing that. Now, Rishi Sunak is now being accused by some people of being too generous rather than being too stingy, which is often what chancellors get.
That's right. And not necessarily too generous, but not focused enough. And what happened today at Westminster, which is not completely off the wall and it's not completely unprecedented, but it is certainly unusual, is it emerged that the boss at the HMRC, the taxman, Jim Harrow, had put on the record a thing called a ministerial direction. Now, that's basically when a senior civil servant puts on the record the fact that they have doubts about a policy that the government wants to pursue. And his point was on the government spraying around all this money, these huge sums of cash. He couldn't be sure that the taxpayer basically was going to get their money back. Now, it's unusual for this to happen. There is no question about that. But it's very clear that the Treasury thinks that the best thing to do is to act big and to act fast. But Labour, in a sort of strange kind of political cross-dressing moment, had this to say about it.
Here's Keir Starmer.
Our concern is that the action they've taken isn't focused on the right places. So the jobs retention bonus is a bonus for all jobs. And many of those jobs, many of the people would have been brought back in any event. Some are really at risk of losing their jobs. So we say it should have been targeted in the areas that most need it, not across the piece.
And the word everyone is using today is deadweight, which is a real Treasury word that normal people never really say. But it's this idea that you spend lots of money on something and a quite large chunk of that goes to people who maybe don't need it, don't deserve it, shouldn't be getting it.
Right. From the government's point of view, the priority here is the situation is basically it's an emergency where they're trying to find ways of preventing mass unemployment, that spend fast, get the cash out the door and try to find ways of stopping something that would be much worse. And if some of that money is maybe not wasted, but if some of that money is spent purposely in the process, well, for the Chancellor, it's worth it. Let's have a listen.
In an ideal world, you're absolutely right. You would minimise that dead weight and do everything in incredibly targeted fashion. The problem is the severity of what was happening to our economy, the scale of what was happening, and indeed the speed that it was happening at demanded a different response. And
so some money, some taxpayer money will be wasted.
Without question, there will be dead weight, and there has been dead weight in all of the interventions we have put in place.
And that was Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, chatting to Martha on the Today programme on Radio 4 on Thursday morning. Now, Fergus, a lot more stuff is open. It's really obvious. You can just see it feels almost like normal sometimes walking down the street. What effect has that had on the spread of the virus?
Well, the infection rate is now low, far lower than it was. It seems to be kind of plateauing. But as the economy is opening, now those figures go up to just when the pubs and restaurants started to open, so we'll have to wait and see what the effect there is. But generally speaking, looking at all the data, looking at hospital data, infection data, it does look like the epidemic is still shrinking.
I mean, broadly, disease still going in the right direction. But one of the things there's a bit of consternation about is whether or not people should be wearing masks. So the government's told people they should wear masks in enclosed spaces if it's hard to keep them from the 2 metres apart. You know, we've seen that government branding everywhere, haven't we, all over the place. It's mandatory on public transport. But then the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, yesterday, when he was, doing his cheesy photo op, serving people in a noodle restaurant across the Thames from the Houses of Parliament, he raised some people's eyebrows for not wearing a mask. And politicians in other parts of the world have been. Macron's been out in this, of course, very chic mask that looks like it's made by Chanel or Yves Saint Laurent. Angela Merkel's been wearing a mask.
She wore one yesterday.
Fergus, what do you think's going on here? Is it because originally the UK scientists said, there might not be really any benefit, but what's happening?
So I was very surprised that Rishi Sunak didn't wear a mask because the messaging has changed completely on masks in the last couple of months. WHO and the UK government originally was saying masks, no benefit really, keep them for just for hospitals. But now we switched to face coverings. Face coverings are now mandatory on public transport in England and Scotland. From tomorrow, they'll be mandatory in Scotland in shops, and they're becoming mandatory in shops because people in the UK haven't been wearing them. And one could say that politicians and scientists and such like should perhaps be setting an example that indoors in settings that they should be wearing face coverings.
Although we should say that the actual guidance put out by the government, the UK government, to workers in whatever setting they're in is wearing a face covering is optional and is not required by law, including in the workplace.
Yeah.
So Rishi Sunak wasn't breaking the rules.
He
may have missed a teaching moment if you wanted to teach people to wear masks more often, but he hasn't broken the government's rules.
But it was interesting to see after a few eyebrows being raised last night that the Culture Secretary, Oliver Dowden, was wearing a mask when he went on a visit to one of the galleries today that is reopening.
But he wasn't wearing a mask when he did the press conference at Downing Street, which we were told we weren't going to get daily press conferences, but there have been quite a lot of them. But then he did have quite a lot to announce.
As of this weekend, our artists, musicians and dancers can start performing live outside to outdoor audiences. We'll also have the resumption of recreational sport, followed later by the reopening of our gyms, swimming pools and leisure centres. Normal life is slowly returning.
Yes, swimming pools. I have to say, Saturday 25th of July, that will be a date in my diary. I'm desperate to get back to the swimming pool. And there's been huge anger from Swim England and swimming enthusiasts around the country. Why we've opened pubs and restaurants, but not swimming pools. There's very good evidence that coronavirus is neutralised, it's killed in chlorine, and the only real concern is changing areas. And you can set up one-way systems and effective controls, which gyms and swimming pools are going to have to do.
Well, if you're brave enough and you fancy an outdoor dip, I think you can go from the 11th. So, Fergus, you need to get yourself booked in.
Yeah, you need to just toughen up, Fergus, and go on Saturday.
Yeah, I've been swimming in the river, so I've been doing that.
Oh, okay. Blimey, wild swimming. There we go.
I'd like to see a picture of that.
No, you wouldn't.
Okay. We should also say that nail bars, beauticians, tattoo artists can open in England from Monday, although they can't do all the things that they might want to do, particularly treatments involving people's faces.
Yes.
And Nicola Sturgeon said that will happen in Scotland from Wednesday the 22nd. So let us know what you think about the fact that you can go and get some things done, but not your face. Right, let's go back to gyms, though, because that is something that people have been clamouring for.
Completely.
And we're going to talk to Joan Murphy, who's the chief exec of Frame Gyms, which is Seven Studios in London. Hello, Joan.
Hi.
There's pages and pages of guidance about how you can open in a COVID secure way. Talk us through some of the things that will be different as a result of that.
Yeah, of course. I think the guidance, there is a lot of guidance. I think the key things for a studio, so we're not a gym, we have only operate classes. So we have a venue that has like multiple studios within it. So for us, we can do all the track and trace scenario because everything's booked by class, by hour. We have cleaning procedures. The biggest thing in the guidance really for us is the capacity. We sit very similar to the hospitality industry where our numbers are going to be quite restricted. But, cleaning procedures, we are a really safe environment. We've had 16 weeks to get prepared for this. Hand sanitizing stations, cleaning procedures before and after classes, knowing exactly who has been in and out of the building the whole time. So I think, this industry is really, really ready to open. We're an essential sector. So, I am very disappointed that we're kind of in the last tranche of businesses to get off the rank. But, let's celebrate that we have got our green light.
Will you be able to get enough people in to each class to make it worthwhile opening the doors that day?
No, is the short answer. I think the viability of the studio sector is in the balance at the moment. I think very much like you mentioned earlier on the show that, 75% of hospitality aren't going to break even this year. It's going to cost us more money to open the doors than to actually stay closed.
Wow.
However, we're an essential sector. We have already got people just direct messaging us, clients. They're so excited about reopening. We have to weigh up the losses that we're going to make.
Is it worth it?
It is worth it because we are in a global health pandemic, and like the chief medical officer said this morning, we need to be healthy, we need to get fit. Our sector is there ready to go. I think it's, a lot of people started with great gusto when they were at home with their fitness regimes, but a lot of people have been waning, and we've got an online platform, which for people like you who maybe weren't too quite confident enough to go into a studio, a lot of people have been starting that way, but opening the doors is going to cost us more money.
I suppose how long can you sort of operate before you need the guidance to change, so you can have the doors open, not just in this month, but next month, 6 months, next year, the year after?
Yeah, well, I think, right now it's about, keeping the doors open as long as we can. The next 6 to 12 months is going to be very challenging for our sector. Because if there's localized lockdowns, if there's no footfall. So we predominantly are in zone 1 and 2 of London, with big businesses not going back into the city or around the West End. Footfall's a massive part of our business. So we pay as you go. So if people aren't there, we're not getting paid. So viability is, one of the key things that we're looking at. And, we're looking at not opening all of our sites because we won't have the footfall, and we will lose so much more money by opening the doors than keeping them closed in the interim.
Fergus, why has it been fitness last rather than fitness first, if you pardon the pun?
I can understand with gyms, with equipment and dumbbells and all the rest of it, that there's concern there about people touching and potentially then passing on the virus that way. But we in well ventilated dance classes, in swimming pools and such like, there are many people in those industries, I'm sure Joan included, who were frankly amazed that pubs were allowed to open on the 4th of July, and they are now going to have to wait till nearly the end of the month. But we had the government saying that it's a stepwise approach, going very, very carefully, and they're prepared to roll back. So the government would say that they are being cautious because we still have the virus out there. And we have to be careful. But Oliver Dowden said today, we have to get match fit, as he put it, and that involves places like Jones opening and getting people on their mats doing their exercise.
Joan, just very, very quickly, reading the guidance, it says no loud music and no shouting. Does that mean it's the end of the spin class?
I hope not. I mean, we don't do spin, but one of the key motivators everyone knows is music when you work out. So we're a very creative brand. We've done a lot of agile things during lockdown and over the 11 years of business. So we're definitely going to think about ways around this. I think, instructors use microphones, so that means that they don't shout. And we'll think about ways that we can, bring the motivation without having to kill the vibe.
You can't do a Rihanna street dance class without loud music, presumably.
No, and I think it's really interesting the point.
And someone shouting at you to make you do it.
Well, the point around recreational sport, number one, where is the common sense in a pub opening before fitness and leisure facilities or recreational sport? I just don't see the common sense in that.
Joan, thank you very much and good luck.
Joan.
And no comment on people who might have started off lockdown being quite enthusiastic about, say, maybe running and by the end of it, or maybe less so.
I don't know anybody like that.
Now, as promised, we're going to talk to Russell Kane, a stand-up comic, because in theory, he could do a stand-up gig outside with a live audience from Monday, as announced by the Culture Secretary. Hello, Russell.
Hello.
So can you picture yourself, doing an outdoor gig on Monday? Could you rustle one up in this short period of time?
They are a lot more common than you would think. There's lots of festivals that happen, particularly throughout the summer up and down the country. It remains to be seen how we define outdoor. Would a loose marquee covering with absolutely no walls around it, were it high enough? Would that count as an outdoor space? Do we need to be completely exposed to the elements, which also does exist as a gig, but we are in the United Kingdom at the rainy, windswept corner of Europe. So you really are rolling a dice and eating a packet of Imodium before you go on if you put a gig like that on and invest your own money in it. But I would be there in my galoshes if need be, spitting out banter into my microphone. It's dearly needed. But lots of people, not just artists, people that work in the industry, are absolutely on their knees. 70% of comedy clubs, comedy venues may close in the next year.
70%?
70%, 60% of the people working in my industry think they won't even make it till February before they leave, because lots of people are self-employed. Lots of us fall through the nets. We either can't furlough for technical reasons, or we daren't furlough, or we'd be a Daily Mail story if we did. So we're sort of trapped in stasis. I'm not moaning about me. I'm okay. I'm just speaking for all the other jesters, actors, and all the other people that put their life and soul into what they do. And when people go, excuse me, we need to get the country moving first. What about travel? What about infrastructure? It's like, what do you think we've been doing for the last 4 months? When you switch on that TV, laughing, crying, having emotions that have got you through, have been the stand-ups, the acting, the dramatic performances. We've seen some streaming from the National Theatres. We've seen Hamilton being streamed. Things like this have got some people who are in a dire state with their mental health through. An artistic experience can lift you, particularly laughter. Obviously, I'm going to be biased, but for me, humour is one of the most important things.
And it's a really big part of our culture as well as a big industry. But I'm interested, do you think that comedy has been treated less seriously by the government and people making decisions than other bits of the arts?
I think if you went up to the average person in the street, I don't mean to sound ungrateful. It's really funny speaking to all the comics and everyone else in my industry, because we all whooped in the air when this £1.5 billion package went out to the theatres. We were like, thank goodness. Then we realised it enabled the theatres to stay closed for ages. Good for the theatres. And then we're like, what are we going to do? And it's the rescue package that keeps me out of work. I've cheered for my own turkey Christmas. If you went up to the average person on the street and went $1.5 billion for the theatres, one of the last thing they would think of is me joking into a microphone. They'd think of opera and Macbeth and proper theatre. And there is, as is in so much of our culture, an elitism and a snobbery about anything that feels a bit more mainstream, or dare it even be a working class entertainment. Gasp. It has to go sort of at the bottom of the food chain.
Satire at the darkest of times has a very strong role, doesn't it?
I think it does as well. Humour can be really powerful. It's not a coincidence that if you go to totalitarian countries, you won't find a stand-up club. There's no one knocking out a Kim Jong-un set at the moment in Pyongyang, believe me.
Well, not that we know. Not that we'd know.
No, we wouldn't know. We wouldn't even get to the punchline, and it would probably literally be a punchline if you concluded it.
Fergus?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because it has been quite depressing for everybody in terms of what it's done to the economy, the lives, being in intensive care. But we're all desperate. On the front line, when you talk to healthcare workers, they need some kind of comedy. They need a dark humour. And I'm just wondering, for you, what have been the sort of comedic themes that have kept you going?
Like I said, I've kept working. The day after I heard that all of my work was cancelled for a year and a half. Oh my God, I still can't say it. I threw my calculator in the bin when I got to a certain number. I didn't want to know what it added up to. And I went straight on, sat-nav holder stuck on the window, iPhone in the sat-nav holder, and started creating sort of a pseudo stand-up content rants, which I've been dropping on the internet, which have done fantastic numbers. The day after Boris Johnson did his Da Vinci Code, impossible to decipher, stay in, go out, stay in speak. 2 million people watch me make fun of that. I'm not mentioning that because I've got a big head and I want everyone to think I'm funny. I'm mentioning it because of how important it is. When people have got their necks crooked scrolling through these phones, 90% of the time we're looking for something to laugh at. And when that laughter fuses with holding power to account, it can be really, really powerful. It's like a limb. If Britain is a person, it's like a limb is just dead and we're getting through it with the other because we need to feed ourselves with our remaining limb. We need to walk to work with our legs. But this other artistic limb must spring back to life, ideally holding a microphone.
But is it worth that limb coming back in the next few months in a sort of very small, tentative way? Or is there actually just no point and we should just wait until you can go the whole hog and you can go back to a big gig like you would do in the old days?
It's a good question. It's slightly academic in that it's not really worth a venue opening if it's below 80% capacity. So the first part of your question, although it's interesting to think about how it might work spaced out, most venues wouldn't be able to afford to do it. And as soon as you go past 80% capacity, how do you maintain 1 metre distance? I mean, how do you maintain 1 metre distance in a pub? My local pub was built in like 1580. 1 metre is the oak beam from my head. You're in the Dog and Duck if you move 1 metre away from someone, and not in the Fox and Hound anymore. But so what I mean is, were it possible, and if it's possible, particularly in purpose-built venues that can rip the chairs out, put round tables in so family groups can sit together, absolutely yes. Most stand-ups, particularly ones with 3 to 5 years experience or more, can handle a more sparsely populated audience. I'm slightly worried about looking out to a sea of sort of menacing serial killer masks laughing with just eyes, but I'm up for it.
Vastly spread out as well.
Well, if you do.
I suspect if people feel safe, they would come. But you never know. If you don't fancy that, you could always fire yourself up into the air in an air-conditioned tube called an aeroplane and breathe in everyone else's COVID for 2.5 hours to Menorca, because that's safe.
Well, Russell, if you get back to one of those gigs, come back on and tell us how it went.
I will do. I'm just going to do one in my garden. No brass instruments. I'm not
No trombones.
Yes, you are not allowed to play brass instruments in front of other people, or woodwind instruments, or sing. Russell, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, before we go, quick team meeting.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm sure, actually, that our listeners and viewers have already noticed this. But because this story's been evolving, we've been talking about more and more other subjects because there's been lots of other major news in the last few weeks. So, very soon, we will be back as Newscast. But we will, of course, still be talking about coronavirus, as it's still, as you often say, it's part of our lives and may well be for a long time to come.
And we'll be back with another episode of Newscast very soon. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
The Coronavirus Newscast from the BBC.